All right, here's a few news articles that I thought were interesting. I mentioned a few days ago, this came out, that CNET, a tech site that posts a lot of reviews and other technical content, had been publishing AI-generated articles, like 80 of them, over the last month, and trying to conceal that fact. And it turns out that they were pretty bad. A lot of them had to have retractions and corrections extensively afterwards, and a lot of them were plagiarized from other sites. So that's one issue. But now, the negative headlines were also a huge concern. They were very concerned that they would get caught doing this and that it would affect the reputation of the site. And it turns out that what's going on here is CNET was purchased by venture capitalists about 2 years ago. And this is the worst case. They originally they promised the CEO that they would not interfere with the reporting. And he said, well, we'll see. And then they did exactly that. They've been forcing the reviewers to write advertising copy and mix it in with the news. And they've been forcing the reviewers to change their reviews to be more positive for people who pay for advertising, which is really the kiss of death. You know, that is the violation of journalistic integrity. And so the people there are very unhappy. And then they had the AI, which they knew was doing bad work, but they went through hoping to just save money and make it cheaper. So, you know, this is the same thing happening at Twitter and to some extent at City College. When you're really short of money, you start doing crazy things to save money. But what they're doing here is what people often do. They buy a company and then they just destroy it to get some cash now. Then the company is gone, but their executives get money. A lot of people did this. I remember there was a presidential candidate years ago, Ross Perot, and this is what he did. This is why he was rich. He would buy companies that were faltering and he would destroy them and sell the components, and that was how he made his money. It is arguably part of the capitalist life cycle that when your company is doing kind of badly, somebody should just sack it and loot it. But anyway, that's what happened to CNET. So Ubiquiti is a tech company. I don't know exactly what they make. I think they make firewalls and stuff, but this has got to be everyone's worst nightmare. They had a incident where someone stole data and threatened to expose it and demanded ransom, and it turned out to be one of their employees. He was an internal employee taking the data, pretending to be an outside attacker, demanding ransom, and then he pretended to be fixing the incident from inside the company, but he was the source of the incident. And he was charged with data theft and extortion. He caused $4 billion loss of market capitalization. And it's really pretty awful. I mean, what's going to happen when your own insiders turn against you? And that did happen at college a few years ago. We had a crazy CTO that staged a fake virus outbreak on the college in order to make himself famous. And it took quite a while to push him out. So, but this is, and you know, the military had Snowden, and they had other people like Chelsea Manning that leaked out the military secrets. It's a huge problem, and that's why you have to have controls against insider threats. And that means you have to audit what your own administrators are doing to make sure they're not doing bad things. Most companies, when they start, the administrator just has total power and they just trust the administrator, but this is not a wise decision in the long run because you can't really trust anybody. Anybody can go through a period in their life when they're on drugs or poor or just very disgruntled, and they become subject to bribery or other temptations. You have to have controls to check to see if your insiders you trust are betraying you. So this I found very interesting. GCC is the main compiler used to compile C code and almost all the code in the Linux kernel. It is the standard for all Linux software. We're going to use it extensively in the 127 class. But what happened here is he had code, and this is going to have an integer overflow. You're going to multiply an integer by this large number, 0x1ff, and then divide by another, so it's possible that this number will overflow. You put it in the variable I, which is a 32-bit integer, which can only go up to a certain size, and then it might overflow. So, but here he checks to make sure it's not an illegal size. It's got to be greater than 0 and less than the size of tab to make sure it's okay, and then he uses it. And it turns out that the GCC compiler, attempting to optimize the code, it believes that integer overflows are undefined and they will therefore never happen. So when you execute this command, it assumes the output is not too big, and it takes away this test in the compiled assembly code. And the developers of GCC are defending this, saying, that's okay. And I must say, that doesn't look okay to me. And he talks about this. They make the assumption that temp is not supposed to overflow, so that test was simply removed. So this is really troubling. Now, we're going to talk in the 127 class quite a lot about the security problems caused by C. And those are C running in its normal standard way. But this is another level of horror I hadn't imagined, that it will actually compile your code and take away the tests you put in there, making a false assumption that some other part of the language will stop a problem when it won't. This is the kind of thing that makes me even more interested in just moving to Rust. And in the 127 class towards the end, we're going to do Rust projects, and you'll see why people want to use Rust instead of C, because Rust is like C, but it's designed not to have these security problems. But anyway, that is pretty awesome. That it's this, it compiles your code, it makes it wrong, and they're defending this as okay. So I guess if you're really deeply understanding exactly how the compiler works, this must be technically correct, but it really bothers me because a normal developer is not going to understand how after this test, I is not in that range. I would believe that. Whatever's done after this if statement, you can trust that I is going to be in that range. Otherwise, what's going on here? That's really disturbing. Anyway, so Microsoft, I heard they were going to put ChatGPT in the Bing search engine, but now they're going to put it in messaging. They've announced this today. The product is not out yet. A premium messaging service will be powered by ChatGPT. So I don't really quite understand what the deal is here. You're going to want the AI writing your messages to send through the chat? Anyway, it's going to generate meeting notes and recommend tasks and action items, so it's going to serve as like a secretary or like as a manager. This is one thing I've heard people say. If people are worried about losing their jobs, the people that might lose their jobs to ChatGPT is middle management. I mean, I've noticed, certainly at the college, it's very clear that the middle management just gets orders from above and they just repeat the orders to us. Because, I mean, the main purpose of them is to announce unfriendly things like budget cuts, and when we complain, they say, well, I have no power to do anything. I'm just relaying commands that come from above, but you can only talk to me. So they're just there to like, sort of as a firewall to prevent management from finding out anything unpleasant. And it seems like that could just as well be an AI. Anyway, we'll see. It's interesting that they're going to put it there. So this is a whole new level. This is, I think, what in America we call these guys incels, guys that are really, really, really angry at women because women won't date them and it's all their fault. So a guy in Singapore has taken this to the extreme. Some woman refused to go out with him, so he's suing her for $2 million in damages for refusing to go out with him. And he's claiming this cost him enormous reputational loss and financial loss. So there's certainly a whole bunch of people in America that have this attitude. There's a whole man's movement with influencers and stuff about how men deserve women to just serve them and it's wrong if they don't. I don't know if there's any legal justification for it here or in Singapore, but I guess we're going to find out.
There was a story about, I think it was in India, that grandparents were suing kids because they wouldn't give them grandchildren.
That would seem like a very similar issue, to sue your kids for not giving you grandchildren. You know, this is part of a big thing in the Republicans in America too, is the replacement theory. How the native, the people of the ethnicity they like, the white European people, are not having enough kids. So in order to get workers and stuff, you have to let immigrants in. And the immigrants, of course, have different religions and stuff. And so they get all mad about that. And this goes all the way back. In ancient Rome, they had the same problem in the time of Caesar. Whatever ethnic group they liked in Rome, again, was not having very many kids, and it was all immigrants coming in. It was changing their culture, and they had a celibacy tax. They would tax you in Rome if you were in the dominant ethnic group and you did not have children. They would punish you for doing that because you were demanding. And the Russians did this. Starting about 20 years ago, the Russians had billboards up encouraging women to be unwed mothers because they had the same problem. The white Russians aren't having enough kids, and so the other ethnic groups they dislike are becoming a bigger portion of the population. Everybody has this. Which, you know, in the long run, this is a good thing, because when I was a kid in the 60s, we were worried about overpopulation. And it turns out that you don't need to have draconian policies like the China one-child policy to stop it. All you have to do is make people a little bit richer, and when they have a higher standard of living, they will choose not to have so many kids. So it turns out that for the planet and the human race as a whole, it's better if we have less kids. But in the next several decades, it's going to make a huge problem, first in Japan and then many other nations, including here, that there's a bunch of old people and not enough young people to pay enough taxes to support them. So anyway, yeah, I mean, the fact is having kids is not, you know, a bed of roses. It's expensive and complicated, and people really not like to have 10 kids once you get a little more control of their life. So this is a cryptocurrency protocol, and they lost $120 million for an Oracle hack, and they're not incredibly detailed about what an Oracle hack is. But apparently there was a weakness in their smart contract, which we were doing a lot of these smart contracts last semester, and it'll probably come back next semester, or maybe the semester after, the cryptography class. It's like an API. You have these functions that can be called from other contracts on the blockchain, and they found a protocol which could be executed, which would change the price of the asset. So they were able to change the price of the asset and sell it at the altered price. And of course, if you can control the price, you can make a ton of money, and that's what they did. People could see that something bad was happening, the price suddenly changed, and so they managed to get $120 million out of it. This is kind of thing could happen with any computer system, with any kind of security flaw, but that's the one that hit them there. So Netflix is trying to stop people from sharing passwords. Apparently, a lot of people get a Netflix password and they tell all their friends and family, and all the people log in with the same password. And instead of just accepting that, they're trying to prevent it. They're trying to make sure that you only log in from your home. And then the problem is, a lot of people do not live in just one place. A lot of people. They talk about there are kids where their parents have joint custody, sometimes in this house, sometimes in that house. There are people who work. There are nations, in Latin America and many other nations, where it is very common for the man to get a job in another country and send money home, and the kids might go to boarding school and stuff. And so it's totally not true that you're always coming in from the same place. And so people are getting upset about this, talking about how is Netflix going to do this? And, it's an interesting.
They can take advantage of that.
What's that?
They can take advantage of that if they wanted to, right?
Yeah,
So
you could give it to all your friends and then tell a story.
Offer it to somebody else. If somebody refers you to Netflix, then you get 25% discount.
Yeah.
You don't want to pay a whole subscription for it. And,
Yeah, it seems like if I was running Netflix, I would just have a simple rule that something like you have to pay like 10% for every additional location or something. And then, but I wouldn't even get into saying you're out of the family and I can tell, you're in the family and I can tell you don't want to go there. Because it's complicated who's in the family. Anyway, all right, so I think that's enough. Let me stop this recording and let's